All right, so just a reminder for everybody, we do events in London now. We had a great event last week. We had the head of retail of WPP, the CEO for UK, India, and Europe at Rapport, Alight Media, a huge and growing media owner, the head of McDonald's Media, and of course, the head of planning and buying at Sky. So for all of you UK European folks or anybody visiting, get in touch with Tim Waldron or any of us. And we got our founding members of our European operation on the bottom there. Group M is a big founding member, as is Talon, Rapport, and many others. So thank you, Blake. Next slide, Blake. There we go. Uh, Thank you, Ginny and Diane and everybody else that joined us last week, and Ben's for it was a great event. We had about 200 members for our holiday party and event where Geopath spoke, and also Adomni spoke, and also Influential, talking about influencers. It was a great event. Kristen, Lauren, and Dylan, thank you all for joining us last week. And every year we have this, and we've got about 25 events online and off all the time. And if you haven't signed up yet, please reach out to Noah Class, noah.class at dpaaglobal.com. We have our CES we're putting together again. There is our private tour that we have every year. We've got, let's see, Neil from out front. We've got Debbie from, and look, Tiffany Southwell is there, as well as Christy from president of ODN. Last year, I interviewed the CEO of Starcom, the head of Microsoft, CEO of Stagwell. And this year, we've got 4 great brands booked, and we're going to end up with another 5. So please join us. We have a big dinner the opening night. We get into the events, the parties, private tours. Great way to increase your professional and personal lives by joining us at CES. Speak to Noah if you're interested in great global brands. Show up there. Next slide. Thank you, Blake. There we go. And okay, so this is the last slide. So now it's Ty Tinker, whose parents gave him an alliterative first name. And Ty, take it over, and it's your show now to tell us what's going on with Adquick. And you're on mute, Mr. Tinker.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Barry. I appreciate that. I'm going to share my screen here in just a moment, but to make things easier on me as a presenter, it does help if I can see your face. So I'm going to tune in mine here, and I would appreciate anybody who can turn their camera on. I just love to see those faces.
That's great. I completely agree with you, Ty. And everybody, please show us your face. As long as you're here on video, don't be shy. Speak to Ty.
Kids and dogs, but yeah, it definitely helps to be able to see responses. I'll be jumping into our experiment here. Let me share my screen. Okay, here we are. Great. So today, as I mentioned, I'll be reviewing a fairly technical experiment I ran this year on audiences and their impact on ROI. And just to confirm, everyone can see my screen. Great. But first, we're going to jump into a story. So recently, I rewatched No Country for Old Men. It's an award-winning movie about a psychopathic killer in West Texas. I'm from Austin, but he was out in West Texas, fortunately, and a little bit before my time. His name was Anton Chigurh. As I watched, I noticed a scene that exemplifies the experiment we ran almost perfectly. So I'd like you to take a step back and imagine that you're a gas station attendant in Marfa, Texas. And this gentleman here walks in and shows you a coin, and he asks you to call it heads or tails. Somehow, maybe you've seen the movie, you already know that your life depends on getting this question correct. You have a 50% probability of living to the next coin flip. So you call heads, Anton flips the coin, and congratulations, it's heads. You win. It's the most you've ever won on a coin flip. But in my simulation, he doesn't want you to win. So he makes you flip the coin 10 more times in a row, and making you guess each time again correctly. Wouldn't it be nice to have a weighted coin right now? Potentially a coin that has a 20% higher chance of hitting heads each time it was flipped. I've actually as a total data nerd, calculated the odds of each flip occurring for your normal coin, the one that Anton gave you, and then the weighted coin that I mentioned before. So using Anton's coin 10 times in a row means you have a 90.98% chance of survival after 10 flips. But using my coin that I've suggested and relates to audiences and ROI, you have a 519% higher chance of survival. I've plotted these odds here, and this is all great theory, but let's go ahead and apply these theories to real life and using audiences and out of home. So as I've drawn the corollary up, using audiences and out of home planning is like using a weighted coin. It's an unfair advantage which guarantees a higher propensity to hit an audience that converts. And the value of those conversions, or the value of hitting that audience, is probably higher than you might think, and drives the KPI that no advertiser can ignore, which is sales. A quote from Erwin Efron says that the goal is the sale, and not many plans attempt to extrapolate up from exposure to sales in a reasoned way that shows why the plan will work, and they should. That's what I'm hoping to do with this walkthrough and kind of prove out, as we've done for a couple of our clients here. So I'll run over this plot very quickly. Of course, I want to answer questions before they're asked, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end. Let's simulate a scenario where you have 1 million coin flips, essentially 1 million people walking by a particular billboard, or 1 million in the population that we're looking at here. And the count of target individuals within that population who are highly likely to convert, that's the simulation, it's very oversimplified, but highly likely to convert and check out, that weren't already going to check out anyway, is 1,000. So the highest number of minimum conversions given a 90% odds that these 1,000 people will convert is about 250 conversions. That's the estimate. It's all theory. Given that same population, holding all variables equal, increasing the number of individuals in that target audience who have a 90% propensity to convert from 1,000 to 1,200, basically 20%, increases the minimum number of conversions to likely occur to 350. So in theory, a 20% higher target audience density could lead to a 40% increase in conversion rate. This is all theory, but we actually prove this to be true. So who am I? Who is Adquick? Quickly, to set the stage, Adquick is a DSP for the entire out-of-home landscape. It facilitates the rapid activation and measurement of out-of-home campaigns. We're highly data-centric. It shows in our planning tools, our audience heat mapping, first-party data, POIs, and more that help with planning, as well as our measurement tools, which include direct web, app, and retail attribution, as well as brand lift studies, sales lift analyses, retargeting, halo effects, omni-channel support, and much, much more. Frankly, as a recovering data scientist, the immense volume and variety of data made available through the platform is the sole reason I was able to find evidence of audience performance. So I'll stop pitching Adquick there, but it's been incredibly useful to have this variety of data. So today I'm going to highlight a couple of massive scale case studies which capitalize on that inventory metadata I mentioned, but also our direct web attribution. Our attribution strategy is industry standard. We leverage exposures, which are basically mobile device ID locations throughout the world that are exposed to particular campaign units. These campaign units are aggregated, and these exposures are collected over the course of the campaign and directly attributed back to our website, or to, an advertiser's website. We pixel various pages on the site, but most important for this conversation is going to be the checkout page, which we pixel. We're able to gather a sample of checkouts that occurred likely as a result of an exposure to an out-of-home campaign, although we all understand that media is mixed and there could be a number of touch points throughout the campaign. The assumption here is that out-of-home was one of those critical touch points. We're not assuming full credit for attribution, but we are assuming that making specific changes in where you place your creative in the world will adjust the amount of conversions that occur related to out-of-home. Awesome. The last piece that I need to explore here is our planning side. So as you can see, this is a screenshot directly from our platform. We can select units all over the US. We had a particular client who I'll get into the case study for, an e-commerce car company who was interested in running basically reaching the most amount of people possible. Their parameters were highly stable, so they selected thousands or tens of thousands of sample locations, which were enormous, diverse. The creatives were highly similar across all of these units. The unit types were almost entirely static, and they were low CPM. The campaign was attributed, so the brand allowed for us to track those site checkouts I mentioned before, and connect those back to the real world billboard exposures. For audiences, they didn't use any. Specifically, this built a pristine natural test environment in which we could identify the impact of using audiences, or at least what the impact would have been on the ROI of this campaign, because they didn't use them in the first place. There was no bias or influence in the planning stages. So this campaign was a data scientist fantasy, likely a growth hacker's nightmare, but often those are two sides of the same coin. So this plan, as it stands, is here. But what we were able to do after the campaign was run and conversions had been collected was we were able to apply a filter. It's very simple, between 0 and 200. It's an audience filter. These are available in platform now. We have 3,500 different audiences to play with, from preferred providers, from Experian, MasterCard, and more. This particular one is from Experian, but it shows us each in-market propensity to have shoppers for used cars that are 6+ years old. You can scale the number up basically between 0 and 200, which filters out particular units across the US, showing you which units have that higher propensity. So I'll do that here. I'd love to show an in-platform demo to anyone who's interested, so please let me know after if that's something you'd like to go through. But basically, as you can see, we filtered out a high count of the units here. This is the planning side. So we did this not just in the platform, but also as a retroactive test. We established 2 groups of units for this particular campaign, which were tested against each other. The first group of units sit between that 0 and 100 index. So they're a low propensity to have shoppers who are looking for used cars against the high propensity to have shoppers for these 6+ years old and used cars. Those are 100 to 200. So we built those 2 groups and we compared them, looking for a statistically significant difference. For anybody who's interested, the statistical test that we used is called the Mann-Whitney U test, which enables us to discern significant differences in conversion rates between these 2 intuitively chosen audience groups and control groups. Of course, we chose a manual audience group, so a segment that is highly relevant to an e-commerce car company, and we compared the performance of these 2 individual groups. So as you can see here, there is a particular line, the low indexed units. These represent the count of conversion rates for each bucket, moving from 0 all the way up to about 1.2%. So of the millions of exposures we saw in the campaign, we saw a number of direct conversions that were attributed to a checkout. And for each one of these units that was on the campaign, I think it was more than 1,300 that we ended up using for the test, they were collected here. The low indexing units, so those that index low against the audience segment I mentioned before, placed under the blue scale, which is drawn out here, and the high indexing units were placed under the gold scale. So what you're starting to see shape up here is a significant difference between 2 distributions of conversion rates and converting units, that are already becoming distinct. So we see our high indexing units had a 27% higher conversion rate, higher median conversion rate, which of course lends itself to thousands of additional site checkouts. For this campaign was a 31% higher return on ad spend and a superiority probability, which represents the likelihood that you would have chosen a unit with a high conversion rate versus a low one, of 56%. You're giving yourself an unfair advantage. The superiority probability is just a weighted coin. You have a 56% chance of flipping heads every single time you choose a unit for the campaign. This is not disregarding the incredibly important nature of planning, creative, location, and some of the other tricky aspects of out-of-home planning that we all know exist. This is just saying that if you're leveraging audiences, you're giving yourself an upper hand before you even begin the planning process, as long as you understand what the audiences that you're targeting are. For the statistics folks, this test had a p-value of 0.00095, which represents an incredibly high statistical significance, highly unlikely to be due to chance, this separation. And again, we tested over 1,300 total units. This is just number one. This is where things get very interesting. What you're looking at here is the normalized audience score. If you remember, they range between 0 and 200. So this is the normalized audience score between 0 and 200. And each one of these little blue dots represents where each unit sits on that normalized audience score. So from the units that had an index score of 0 all the way to 200 against their cumulative conversion rate average. Simply, what kind of impact did this additional unit from 1 to 2 here have on the conversion rate of the campaign? And what we're looking for is a positive trend. So every single unit that was added to the campaign would have had a positive impact, just about, on the conversion rate for the campaign. This is direct ROI that we're seeing. So every single time that you slide this ticker over by 1, you are filtering down to the units that are highly likely to have a high conversion rate, giving yourself the largest advantage possible when pitching out-of-home plans to clients. You can see it kind of teeters off here. This is something we noticed across the hundreds of simulations that we ran. There is kind of a max point for these particular campaigns. So we're exploring this in kind of deeper, in a deeper sense. But at this point, we do see mostly a positive trend. So I'm going to run into case 2 here. This is a similar scenario where we had a client who wanted high impact in terms of reach, but low CPMs. So they selected thousands of units across the US. This particular company was a online credit reporting company, so highly normalized across the US. They don't have retail store locations that are influencing a retail presence. So it's an online company. Client was a fintech credit services company. And the audience that we selected to test against was an in-market, was shoppers for an in-market credit card. So basically, what is the propensity of each one of these small neighborhoods to be shopping for a credit card? It's from Experian. What we saw was, again, incredibly useful, not surprising, but very useful. We saw 113% higher conversion rate among that high indexing group. So those group of units that indexed highly against that particular audience segment had almost a 2 or more than a 2x conversion rate, which represented hundreds of thousands of incremental signups for the application and a superiority probability, again, that coin flip of 60.9%. I mentioned earlier that Anton did not give you a coin that had a 20% higher probability, and I can. This is what I'm referring to. It's the audience segment that we used for this particular campaign. We didn't just stop at the single audience, though. We tested 12 different audiences that were relevant to the campaign, including mortgage shoppers, auto loan shoppers, and more, and compared them against a random sample of audiences just to make sure that we were factoring in the inherent bias of using audiences. And we found that the lift over baseline of using carefully, intuitively selected audiences that are relevant to a campaign increased the performance in terms of conversion rate over a baseline of random audiences. So think, cream shoppers and coffee lovers and dog lovers, etc. The lift over the baseline was about 229%. Again, p-value incredibly low, representing a high statistical significance and a large enough test sample for us to be comfortable. I'll show this last plot here. Very similar, smaller density of units, and some, again, drop off towards a particular point. So what we recommend to our clients when thinking about planning with audiences is you stick towards the middle. Use a normalized audience score of about 100. And as you accommodate different needs in planning, maybe that's more units, maybe that's a higher specificity of units, you can increase your audience score. Cool. I'm going to take a stop there. I'm sure there's questions, but please, let's connect. Feel free to reach out for a one-on-one. This is my LinkedIn, so you can add me there, and we'll stay in touch. I'll be posting about this kind of thing quite often. Thanks for listening. I appreciate everybody.
Let's see if there's any questions. And if you do, you could just speak up. That's fine. Um, for Ty, anybody?
Yeah, I got one.
Maybe
I have
go
one,
ahead,
Barry.
please. Yeah,
Uh,
thanks.
so, Ty, the two experiments were based on campaigns that were fairly large. How do these methodologies translate to smaller campaigns?
Yeah. So the campaigns we used for the test were gigantic, and it made for a great test environment. Um, Applying this to campaigns gives you an incredible chance of increasing your conversion rate, no matter the size of the campaign. So you can apply an audience to a single unit across, somewhere in New York if you want, as long as you understand that the audience is relevant to a brand. Lots of these brands are already using audiences in their digital marketing, so they want to focus in on where the audiences have the highest propensity to convert. So I'll make that distinction. The brands we used, or the campaigns that we used for this test, gigantic. They had to be to create a great test environment, but these audiences can be applied at any scale. I also noticed a question in the chat. These units are static billboards. The units on these two campaigns were primarily static billboards. This can be applied to digital or programmatic units. In fact, our DSP, our programmatic DSP, leverages audiences very regularly to target specific areas with those audience segments. So absolutely.
Chris, or Ty, as a company, I mean, would you characterize yourselves as a DSP, an SSP, and a data analytics company? Is that kind of how you would? Yeah.
I think that's a fair. Ideally, we'd like to be the operating system or the plumbing, so everybody can run experiments easily, everybody can measure their campaigns easily, everybody could target the right people easily. So it all kind of fits together.
Yeah, excellent.
Awesome.
Joel, we didn't call out Joel from Toronto, from Canada at Patterson. We've got lots of people all over. Joel, go ahead with your question,
Thanks, Barry.
and then we'll get
Good
to
job, Ty.
yeah,
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear
yes.
you.
Awesome. Good job, Ty. I just had a question. As a supplier, we see this as a day-to-day ask from our clients when it comes to both direct purchasing, but also programmatic purchasing. And I find this an interesting discussion. I'm just wondering on your side, have you measured or started to attempt to measure the difference in audience targeting when it's done pre-campaign or at the actual purchase level?
Yeah, let me make sure I understand your question here. So you're asking about audience planning pre-campaign. Does that relate to kind of predetermined audiences, or are you thinking in-flight optimizations? Kind of referring to, is that the comparison you're looking for there?
Yeah, I think when a lot of the suppliers, including ourselves, when we're selling direct campaigns, a lot of the targeting that we apply, we pull that pre-campaign based on historical data. That is in essence audience targeting. You now have this alternate world of the programmatic purchase that in theory is using historical data, but it's applying it at the individual play level. And that brings up this discussion of, is there an increase in that curve, so to speak, when you start doing that math at the purchase level versus when you kind of do that data pull in at an initial stage and potentially optimize once every set frequency. Just wondering if you've kind of started to look at the differences between purchase method.
Yeah. For this test, we did not. We set up a 28-day test window and identified the conversions that occurred, basically agnostic of any influence of audience selection. So for this test, we didn't test that. But for the programmatic side, we've run optimizations on top of audiences that are converting well. And we have seen almost a 2x increase in the conversion rate. So in flight, yes, but not a statistical test, just a month over month identification of the conversion rate increase. So it's suggested, and it's something we recommend in terms of optimizations, especially where we have that kind of flexibility. On the static side, which is mostly what I was focusing on here, we're not going to have that flexibility, right? These are booked well in advance, planned well in advance, and the creatives are set. So the units month over month can be changed, but yeah, we don't have as much flexibility. So it's something that we recommend, but haven't tested out as much.
Esther and Chris have been conversing in the chat room. Esther, do you have any other questions? That Chris has done a great job of being hands on keys and face on screen. Well done, Chris. Esther, any other questions you want to weigh in on?
No, thank you. I've seen a lot of great ROI results from static billboards because they are so much less expensive. And so this has been a really great conversation to have, and I really appreciate being able to slide in about 24 hours ago. And thank you so much for the work that Adquick and Ty and Chris have done today. Appreciate it.